Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by my dear friend Shruti Kapoor. Shruti is a front-end engineer on Slack, that is the chat app for work. If you've ever worked with Slack or done anything on Slack, you'll enjoy today's discussion because we talk with Shruti about what it takes to build features on Slack. Features like catch up with the swipe cards, or features like clips, which is video uploads, huddles, etc. Shruti has worked on the video features and even has a patent in her name pending for her work there. We go into the details of all of that, including how even one files a patent, and so on and so forth. Finally, we end our discussion with some commentary on the field of diversity and inclusion in tech. And this is actually really special for the Contagious Code podcast because in light of recent criticism for not enough diversity, specifically gender diversity, we have a really great series of guests lined up to help balance the scales a little bit. We care a lot, I care a lot about diversity, inclusion, and equal representation to capture a broad range of perspectives, all of which are valuable, meaningful, and useful. And to that end, I'm so happy to have Shruti on the podcast and celebrate really her accomplishments as an engineer, as an inventor, and as a member of the community. So all of that will follow. If, again, as mentioned, if you've ever wondered about patents, how Slack is built, or the state of diversity and inclusion in tech and what we can do to improve, this episode is for you. I'd like to offer this, of course, to everybody at zero cost. In fact, I do. And the way we can do this, especially since this is separate from my day job, is through sponsors. So let's take a moment to thank them. This podcast, is sponsored by Code Crafters. My most popular talk ever. I teach people React by building a React app, but then deliberately not importing React. Instead, we build React. So when it says cannot read property create element of undefined, we just define an object with a create element on it and slowly build React from scratch. That is exactly how Code Crafters teaches you how to do things. So they teach you how to build things like Docker and Redis and Git, all in your own programming language, TypeScript, Python, whatever it is you're comfortable with. So you understand the mechanism, you up-level your coding, and you also understand how these systems work. It's a really great tool. And in partnering with the Contagious Code podcast, all our listeners get 40% off if and when you decide to start paying. There's also a free tier. We are also partnered with That Conference in Wisconsin, and we're giving away up to 5 free tickets. If you want to learn more, share this on social media, mention you'd like to go to that conference, and we're more than happy to enter you into a raffle where you can win up to 5 free tickets. And these 5 free tickets will not go to one person, just to clarify. The podcast is also sponsored by Stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize your application logic through your application and show you where state changes and so on. It's got a really great canvas-based visual state builder where you can draw state charts and model state machines. And when you're happy with it, you can then export them to code and just fill in the business logic that is exclusive to your domain. If you'd like to give that a try, go to stately.ai. And now for my discussion with Shruti Kapoor. Shruti Kapoor, what an honor to have you on the Contagious Code podcast.
So good to be here, Tejas. So glad that we could share podcasts together.
Yeah. I was on your live stream some time ago. Thank you for having me. And I'm so happy we get to see each other again. We should just maybe be guests on each other's things just to catch up,
Yeah.
I've been a fan of your work for a very long time, back to the PayPal days. And I've watched your content. I think you had one of the first talks about a lot of new stuff in React. I think when maybe hooks was new, or you had
Yeah.
a talk at ReactConf about what's new in React. And I've
Yeah.
been a fan since then. We met at Reactathon in 2022, and this has been a long time coming. So really happy to have you on the podcast. For those who maybe aren't so familiar with you and aren't as big fans of you as I am, I'm wondering if you could do just an introduction to yourself, your work, what you've been up to, where you come from. The stage is yours.
Yeah. Feelings are mutual. I've been a big fan of you as well. Every time you get on the stage, I'm like, yes, Tejas is on. This is going to be a fun talk. You have like this contagious energy about you, which is why I guess your podcast is also called Contagious Tejas. I don't know.
There's actually a whole story behind that. I mean, it's called Contagious, one, to teach people how to pronounce my name. It's not Tejas. But two, in Spanish, it means with Tejas. So you are,
Oh,
contagious with
cool.
Tejas at this point. Yeah, so it's a double meaning. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to detract from your introduction.
Nice. Love it. Yeah, so a little quick introduction about me. I have been working at Slack for the last 2 years as a lead member of technical staff, which is a mouthful, but basically it means somewhere between senior engineer to staff engineer. Nobody knows what it is. Everybody has their own titles. Because Slack is now Salesforce, so the titles are kind of weird. Um, I was working at PayPal before that and started speaking at conferences. I think in my like first month at PayPal, and I think I met you at Reactathon first, but I had seen your talks, and I think we spoke online as well before that. So I think I've
Probably.
known you for like forever now. I can't even put a number on how long we've known each other, but
Yeah.
I've been a fan of your work and I saw your Fluent React book came out. I was such a big fan. I need to get one signed. Um,
Oh, sure.
and yeah, so I gave a talk at React conference, which was really fun. It was very different for me because I've never like spoken about leading or like bleeding edge technologies before like that. Like it was just coming out and I was talking about it. So that was very intimidating, but also like a lot of fun. Before PayPal, I was working as a web developer in Telus in Canada, which is a telecom company, if people don't
Hmm.
know. I loved my time there. I think I learned Redux, React, Angular, JavaScript, Ruby,
Wow.
and automation testing there in 3 years. So that was a really fun time. And also agile development, which I had no idea what it was, but a lot of fun. And before that, I went to school at UBC in Vancouver, where I did computer engineering. So I come from like the boring, standard, typical computer science background, computer engineering background.
This TELUS, that wasn't a startup, right? It was probably a larger telecom provider.
Yeah, it's a pretty big telecom provider. You can kind of think of it as um, what's the telecom in US? AT&T.
T-Mobile,
Damn. Yeah,
Verizon.
T-Mobile,
Okay.
Verizon, AT&T. So there's like two big telecoms in Canada. There's this and Bell,
Hmm.
which is now part of Rogers. Is it part of Rogers? I don't know. Rogers, Bell, and Team and Telus. So there's the three big conglomerate, and Telus was really really fun, very fast, very fast and like very high paced and like a lot of fun
Right.
work happening there.
So it sounds like you learned a lot in those 3 years. I looked you up. I didn't need to, but I did just in preparation for this. And the AI that I used to find out more about you
Uh-huh.
told me you worked at TED, like the company behind TED Talks. Was that
Oh,
true, or did the
TEDx.
AI hallucinate?
Oh, no, 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 no hallucination. Yeah. So I actually built a site for TEDx China. Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, very random. I'm surprised your AI one picked it up. I think it's probably from LinkedIn because I don't even know where else I've talked about it. Yeah, so I built a TEDx site for China. Actually, not China, but one of the cities in China. I can't pronounce the name, so I'm not going to say it. But it was really fun because I think it was like a WordPress site and it was really simple, but really cool working across zones. I think I was still in like second year of university back then. Really cool working across zones with people and working with people who didn't speak the language. So every time they would send me a message, I had to translate before understanding. And meetings were always horrible because I could not understand anything. But it was really, really fun because I get to work on a really cool platform and with really cool people and put up information about speakers who are going to come up. So even though I did not understand anything, I think it was still a really cool technical experience to have.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so you work at Slack. If I can like cast my mind into the minds of the audience, I feel like most everybody uses Slack. And I mean that alone must be such a interesting feeling, right? I came close when I worked at Spotify, which I'm wearing their hoodie today, and it just happens to be a coincidence. But I was working on this music player that like the majority of the world with access to music internet uses. Wild.
Yeah.
I'm sure those people listening are wondering what that's like. I mean, you work on this application that is used by millions, maybe even billions. how is it? Like, do you have to be very careful with things? Do you ship on Fridays? What goes wrong? Maybe we can start by talking about what area of Slack you actually work on today.
Yeah, great question, actually. I think before I joined Slack, I was pretty intimidated by the same fact that it like impacts so many people. And if I break something, it's gonna be pretty bad and I'm gonna be fired right away. But honestly, like we ship code all the time. We ship like so much code every day, even on Fridays. And sometimes things break, sometimes people get impacted, but most of the times things are fine. And if something breaks, we just roll back real quick, and we've got like backups in place. So we can talk about all of that later.
What,
But
when was the last time something broke? How often do things break? Is it like weekly and then you
yesterday
just roll back?
afternoon, I was doing something. I was about to deploy, and deploys were blocked because something had broken. Um, Pretty frequent. But
Wow.
here's the thing, right? Like it breaks because we know it's broken. Like the developers at Slack know it's broken. However,
Yeah.
users don't know it's broken. So like user facing impacts might be lower because we've got like backups in place and we've got like things in place. So you may not see it, but we know it's broken. So we're just like, okay, fix it, roll back real quick. So we've got like a whole
Wow.
incident responder thing. But yeah, sometimes it can be stressful. Thankfully, in the last 2 years that I've been at Slack, I haven't had to had go through any incident responses. So no incidents from my side. Yes, thank God. But before I dive deep, let me talk about like what I do at Slack. So I've been at Slack for the last 2 years, like I said, and the first year I spent in a team which is called HQ, virtual headquarters, and that is the team that makes products like Huddles. Huddles with video is what I worked on when I first started Slack. I then went on to work on clips. Clips, if folks don't know, it's when you record a video or when you share a video in Slack, it's called a clip. People don't really usually know it's called clip, but it's like the videos or the audio files that you'd send over in Slack. And we have like a whole recording procedure for starting a recording within Slack itself. I actually built a really cool feature within Slack, which is how to prevent infinity mirroring, which is actually a problem that you may have seen with like every software that allows you to share your screen. Um, what infinity mirroring is like you share your screen and then it'll show another screen and then you'll show another screen, you'll show another
Oh yeah.
screen. So it just goes on forever. And it's a problem that has existed for in all softwares and we don't really have a solution for that. So usually people come up with like these like patches, like for example Zoom won't let you see the screen that you're sharing itself, so it just shows a bar at the top. And I
Yeah.
think Google Meets will show like a message at the bottom that says don't share the screen you're looking at, otherwise it'll cause infinity mirroring. They're just
Yeah.
like call it a day. And I
Yeah, but
think
I just, sorry to interrupt you, but like this is a massive pain for me because I work without any external monitor. And
uh-huh,
so if I share my screen and I
yeah,
don't share a single tab, oh, it happens all the time.
right,
And I never knew that Zoom mitigates that way, but I now that you say it, yeah, for sure. But
yeah,
like Google doesn't even care. It's
yeah,
just
like
it's good luck. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like you deal with it. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
care. Because
Yeah.
it is a problem, right? And you can't do anything about it because you are sharing the screen that is being mirrored, that is being casted. So
Yeah.
it exists as a problem. However, like in Slack, we wanted to come up with a way where you can share your screen without having that infinity mirroring effect. And the reason is because this also causes cognitive paralysis, like this, because you see so many
Yes.
screens, it is really hard on your brain. And so Slack cares a lot about accessibility. So it's also a big problem there. So we came up with a solution and got it patented. So I have a first patent in my name. So excited.
What? You're an inventor. That's so
Yes.
cool. That
Yeah.
wow, congrats.
Thank
Shruti
you.
Kapoor, the great inventor. Wow, I'm so impressed. Genuinely, like this is not fake. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed by it. It's almost been a year since I worked on that, but it's been so fun. I think like the project itself was so stressful because, this is something that I think this is probably like a learning that I took for myself in my career, which is, problems will exist in softwares and sometimes we'll just like put a hacky solution on top of it or we'll just like put a message and call it a day. However, if you think a little bit deeper and try to like think outside of the box, you may be able to come
Yeah.
up with a solution which improves the user experience a lot more, and it's still better than whatever is out there in the industry. And so I think just like thinking a little bit more about how you can make the experience better for users, I think creates a great experience for everyone.
That is so cool. I want to oh, I want to dive so deep on all of those things. Um, Thank you for that so far. I don't know if you had more to say there, or
uh I was
if I could.
I was yeah, go for it if you
No,
have a
because
question.
you were sort of like in the middle of your experience with Slack, and I
Yeah.
don't want to. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
was
was
just gonna follow up and say what I'm doing now because that was a year
yes.
ago. Yeah, so I worked on that, and then after that, I moved on to the accessibility team. Um, I had kind of like I didn't really have much experience with accessibility before joining Slack. I did do like some experience. I did have some experience at Telus where I made sure the site was accessible. After that, I think companies didn't really care about having an accessible experience. It was so sad. But then once I moved to Slack, people took it really seriously. And like while I was working on Huddles, this is something I did as well in making sure Huddles was accessible. And
Hmm.
I had to refactor all of the grid code that we had because not none of it was accessible, which was supposed to be like a 1 week job, but it took me 1 month, which was so sad. And so I was like, okay, really need to learn what accessibility is and like how to properly do it instead of just like slapping like a tab index on everything and just calling it a day, which,
Yeah,
most people do.
yeah,
Because, we don't really know what a good accessible experience looks like.
yeah.
So I was like, I want to learn this properly. So I joined the accessibility team at Slack, which is where I've been working for the last 1 year. And most recent project that I worked on was the redesign of Slack, which I think most people may have seen by now if you're using Slack. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on how it's been a great user experience for folks. Some people did not like it. Sorry to those people. Well, life sucks. What can we do?
Yeah. There's
So,
always those people, right?
yeah. But we tried our best to make it like as intuitive as possible and
Yeah.
reduce cognitive overload, which is something we care about a lot at Slack.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. I had breakfast actually this morning with Vitaly Friedman, the founder of Smashing
Oh,
magazine. He's a neighbor,
yeah.
and we'll probably get him on the podcast at some point. And he was explaining to me how people with deafness, so hearing loss, either partial or total, use the internet. And
Hmm.
I mean, he for me is like the gold standard, as you are, with accessibility and human centered design. And
Right.
it was blowing my mind because he was explaining to me how, first of all, there is just no single sign language. There's
Hmm.
American Sign Language and there's
Yeah.
various dialects, but there isn't a single one. And he was also explaining how sign language is a four-dimensional language. Again, blew my mind. So there's, the x-axis, the y-axis, the z-axis for depth, but there's also time. And the way you gesture over time matters. And so, like,
Oh,
how do we even create that on the web? And so when I
yeah.
hear you talk about similar topics like reducing cognitive dissonance and making things as intuitive as possible, I'm assuming also in that intuitiveness, it's not just for people with perfect health, but for everybody. That just really moves me. So I don't even know the details of this work yet, but I already appreciate it so much. So okay, let's talk about this redesign
Yeah.
and maybe like go back in time, depending on how much time we have here. You mentioned two things. You mentioned one, you moved to the accessibility team, and you mentioned you wanted to go deeper than just slapping a tab index on things and hoping for the best. You wanted to actually
Yeah.
create like proper accessible user interfaces,
Yeah.
and you're exploring what does that mean, and you found that most companies or most teams just don't care enough. So
Right.
there's the human side of this that I want to dive into, but there's also the redesign itself, and let's maybe start with the redesign itself.
Yeah.
Can I share with you my favorite thing about this redesign?
Yes,
Um,
please.
I love the catch up feature.
Oh,
The little Tinder cards. I don't know if that's even part of the redesign, but I
I think
absolutely love it. It's
you're using the mobile app, right? Which has the little like cards, right?
yeah,
Yeah. I didn't work
yeah.
on that because that's the mobile app. I'm on the desktop app, but I know somebody who did, and I'll pass on the feedback.
That's so cool.
That idea actually came from the developer who built it. And this is something that I love. If you have an idea, it's sometimes hard to like put it across in a big company like that. But at Slack, like
Yes.
This person had the idea. He proposed it to the product owner. They said, let's do it. Spent like a quarter working on it, and it's in the hands of users now.
That's so cool. You know, no no disparagement of Spotify here, but I tried that and it didn't go that way. So I'll just leave it there. That's so cool. I
Right?
love that. Respect to Slack. Okay, so for the desktop app, let's talk about the redesign. I didn't notice much of a redesign, and this is maybe a good thing because it still felt familiar.
Hmm.
However, I did notice the channel selector on the left
Yeah.
is just vastly different. I mean, it used to have all of my workspaces with hotkeys
Yeah.
listed, and now they're stacked with icons. And I click on them, and they sort of unfold, and I see them. I'm assuming you
Yeah.
worked on that.
Yeah.
That's
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 exactly the stuff that I worked on. And so there's actually two modes where you can enable that. You can open the workspace switcher, we call it, which is the little icon. And if you open it, then you will see everything
yes.
like opened. If you collapse it, again, part of like cognitive overload, like if you're only looking at one workspace, you should only see one workspace. If you collapse it, we don't let you see anything else. You just focus on whatever is in front of you.
That's so cool. Oh yeah, I see that the hotkey is Command Shift S. For those listening, I'm actually using it right now. Can I remark here? I actually feel the cognitive overload when I enable it. Like I see all of these other workspaces, and each of them has like a little notification
Yeah,
badge.
exactly.
Wow, I actually feel the effects of your accessibility work in real time here. I am so
Yay.
impressed. I am so
Yay.
impressed. You know, I feel like we should maybe shout out the browser company, right? Because Arc, the browser, does almost exactly this with the sidebar. You
Oh,
have
does
all.
it?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you use Arc, but
I have used it in the past, but I had no idea it does that. Let me look it up.
yeah, the browser Chrome, so the browser frame has the tabs not on the top like Chrome, but on the side in a sidebar, and it does two really cool things. One, if you accumulate like a million tabs, like most of us, then if you come back tomorrow, it just archives the tabs that you weren't interested in based on how much
Oh,
time you spent on them. So that's cool, and you can always go restore them. But also, you can just hide the sidebar entirely and have like the full page, the full frame of the browser be the current web page you're on. No distractions.
right.
Um, and I think that's super cool. I love that there's this direction that you're moving towards. So, okay, my question was actually going to be about that, right? Meaning how is that more accessible? But I feel like I've answered my own question because I feel lighter in my brain. This is
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The bit about accessibility. So, one thing that I think sometimes folks who are new to accessibility may not realize is accessibility is not just about like keyboard navigation or like screen reader experience. It's also visual experience and cognitive experience. And this is part of the experience where it helps reduce the cognitive overload when you have so much stuff open in front of you. There's a lot more stuff that we're doing in the same regard as well. And I think this is like step one towards it.
Um, I I have a question that's maybe challenging this cognitive overload idea a little bit because I think for the people that don't like this feature,
Hmm.
the reason I suspect they don't like it is because there's cognitive friction because I
Hmm.
was used to this old way. What is this new thing? I have to learn a new thing. Um,
Yeah.
is the bet sort of internally that yes, there's initial friction, but over time, this is going to be better for everybody. And we know that because we've done the research and we've done the studies, and this is what we're prescribing for our users. Is that sort of the internal discussions that happen around a feature like this?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, like we do a lot of research before pushing out a big feature like this. Like a lot of UX research happens, and we've had similar experience. Like people have said that most people have liked that there has been, not a lot of distractions. However, some people have said that now you've changed the way I do Slack, and I don't
Yeah,
really want to think about, how Slack works because I'm trying to get my work done. I don't care about how Slack works, right? So we've
yeah,
gotten that feedback, and we actually listen to this feedback a lot. And depending on how much feedback we get, we try to reiterate on these features as well. Like one of the examples is we had the workspace switcher at the top, and I think it's like loaded like a bunch of channels. But then we've gotten not channels, workspaces, and we've gotten feedback that that's actually very distracting. So instead of loading it just like that, like in a popover, we actually now slide it to the left. So we
yeah.
receive feedback and listen to it a lot. And if a lot of folks complain, we go back and reiterate over the project. There's also been features where we've had to actually completely pull it back because we've received a lot of negative feedback, which has overpowered the positive feedback we've received up on the feature. So we reiterate a lot, and there's a lot of UX research that happens as well. Um, and if majority of the folks say this is beneficial, that's only when the feature goes out.
Wow. Um, and all of this happens, and this is I'm getting a lot more respect for Slack right now. You're doing a great job. I don't like if Slack listens to this, they should like give you a raise. It's so like it's I've never had this level of insight into how much goes into these kinds of things. Okay, so I have a question around feedback management. You mentioned if the negative feedback overwhelms the positive feedback, then you all have redone features.
Yeah.
What's that like? How does one track feedback at that scale?
Yeah, so there's actually multiple channels. Twitter, like really big channel for us. We listen to a lot of feedback on Twitter. I think you might have also seen that Slack's Twitter account is pretty active and we respond back pretty heavily. LinkedIn account, same thing. So our social network accounts are pretty active as well. We also have like Zendesk tickets, which is like when you say you have a feedback on the site itself on slack.com, that goes through our internal system, which goes through Zendesk. And it's all integrated because when somebody files a ticket in Zendesk, it goes to one of our representatives and then they filter through it, see how heavy that volume of that specific feedback is. And if it is a lot, and I think a lot, I don't know, it depends on what you call a lot. But if it is a lot, it gets filtered through to us, and then we work on that feature. So it's, I would say, like if we are receiving a lot of negative feedback, we get to know it like pretty fast, like within a day or
Wow.
two.
And
Um,
these are all curated by human beings. This is all
yeah,
manual. There's no like
yeah.
robots monitoring these channels for you.
No.
Wow.
I don't know if we actually have like a chatbot. Honestly, I haven't really like looked at that.
Yeah.
But most of the tickets, most of the feedback that we receive gets filtered by a human. I think there might be some form of like automation in between that system, but the final point of review is a human, and a human would look at it and see like, okay, this is valid feedback, or okay, this is just like a user error, and I need to help them out.
That's so cool. You mentioned I'm just really impressed with that because like so we had one of the guests on the podcast, either the episode's out or it will be, is Matt Billman, so the CEO of Netlify,
Oh.
and he was talking about in the early days of Netlify, he was and they still are hyper receptive to feedback, but they have to fine tune what they hear to have it
Hmm.
be the right feedback, right? Because
Right.
there will always be the trolls and the angry people who are just like, you changed this thing, you're causing me friction, it's not good, when they don't fully
Yeah.
get the long term effects. So
Yeah.
I applaud so much that that's such a high priority in Slack, and I think you know people here listening. That's how you get feedback delivered. You just like go on social media, and it's true for me. I was actually pleasantly surprised to find that the account on X, formerly Twitter, at Slack HQ,
Yeah.
follows me. That's so cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It's,
They don't
okay,
even
you
follow
mentioned
me. That's
what?
impressive.
Yeah, they should
Awesome.
follow you. I think more people should follow you. If you're listening to this episode, you probably have plenty of reasons now to follow Shruti. Um, you mentioned research. We do a lot of research.
Yeah.
How does that look? I mean, is there a dedicated research team who like it's their
Mhm.
job 40 hours a week every week to like study users and like read through cognitive papers and come up with like, okay, this is our thesis, we're going to run an experiment. So at Spotify, for example, we had experiments where you just like select a cohort of users and you're
Mhm.
like, for this percentage, I'm going to roll out this thing, see how it
Mhm.
affects them, and if it's positive, then we just widen the net, so to speak. And Spotify notorious for running like many experiments like that.
Right.
I don't know if I'm leaking this, but I haven't worked there in 3 years, so whatever. I hope
Yeah.
they don't sue me or do a cease and desist. In any case, experimentation is pretty common in software. Is that
Right.
part of the research? I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah. Great question, actually. So that is part of the research as well. And I don't think they'll sue you, honestly, because I think this is pretty common in software companies. So I hope don't come after you for that. We do something similar as well. We also have experiments that we run all the time. And similar thing, like we have a group of folks who will see how the feedback is. That usually happens after the feature is developed and deployed. Before the feature is developed, we also do a lot of like UX research,
How?
which yeah, so we actually have like UX researchers within the teams as well. So there might be like one team, one UX researcher for like four feature teams, or depending on the volume of the team, the size of the team. So when a feature is rolled out, we usually test it like within our internal Slack itself. And that's the first step of getting any feedback. Once we have
Wow.
like good feedback from there, once it looks like it's stable enough, we'll make prototypes in, I think we make it in Figma, but don't quote me on that. So we make prototypes and then we'll actually test it with real users and we'll pay them like $25 or something, like some amount of money to just get like
Feedback.
their feedback in. And I think it's like usually a 1 hour long chat. Depends on what kind of feedback you're getting. It could either be that the UX researcher is walking you through the flow themselves and is kind of asking you questions. And I've sat through those sessions as well. They are like super informative. I love them. If anybody ever has a chance to sit in a UX research session, please do, because it's so enlightening and you understand so much about the user experience. So we'll do that. We'll usually have like a 1 hour session with each person and we'll walk through the experience. Usually the idea behind a UX research session like this is you want to kind of guide the user on what you want them to do. For example, like send a DM or like start a channel. However, you don't want to tell them how to do it, right? So they have to
Right.
find their way. And by doing that and by following how the user is doing, by studying how the user is doing, we find out what the friction points are, right? So let's say that you ask them to create a DM, and they're just like so lost within the new redesign. They're like, it used to be here. Where the heck is it? So we capture
Yeah.
that feedback. And the more sessions we do, the more feedback we get. And we realize like this is not a hotspot or like people don't understand this or whatever it may be. So that's number two. Like that's the second step of doing UX research. Once that goes out and we have a lot of good feedback from it, we either incorporate the feedback into our features or go back to the drawing board and start over again. And it has happened multiple times where we've had to like restart the feature because it did not make sense at all to the user. So we start something else. And when that happens, when that passes, we put that feedback back into development. And that goes back into either a new experiment or the same experiment. And then we keep reiterating through that. Once the feature rolls out, we keep reading up the results from it to see how that's going. And then if we get more feedback from like Zendesk tickets, which is our customer service reps, we reiterate as well. So a lot of work goes around before like releasing it to our internal Slack to everybody else in the world. So you can be sure that by the time a feature lands in your hand, it has been well researched, at least well tested, and we've gotten feedback on what has worked and what has not worked so far.
I feel like if anyone listened to that going forward, when Slack rolls out something new, they think twice before like immediately hating it. Because like in all my experience with startups, right? Like especially when I was in an office, and this was before you worked at Slack. Slack was pretty young, to be fair. This was back when actually Slack.com had this beautiful, I think it was one of the best landing pages I've ever seen. It was a photo of a Mars rover on Mars,
Hmm.
and it just had a really great headline. It was like the chat app for teams that put robots on Mars. And it just highlighted that. And NASA. It was the coolest front landing page I've
Wow.
ever seen. Yeah. So I think it was 2016 or something. But
Right.
anyway, like we were using Slack in an office, and then I come to work one day, and my coworker is like slamming. He broke his keyboard, and I was like, "Why? What's happening here?" He's like, "I can't figure out this new feature. I hate Slack. They keep changing it." Um, and just hearing the amount of work that goes into that, I feel like is worthy of a little bit of respect. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. I'd love to talk about patents,
Hmm.
um, and getting a patent,
Yeah.
being an inventor. Um, what's that like? I mean, because like I've had so many ideas over the course of my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should have. I don't like. How do you know what to patent, when to patent it, how to patent it?
Yeah, great question, actually. So I think the experience of making a patent or like filing a patent would be different when you are working for a company versus if you're independent or if it's an independent work that you want to patent. So I can't speak for patenting an independent work because the patent that I have is with Salesforce, which owns Slack. So I'll talk about that. I think knowing if it's patentable is actually a really good question because I was feeling the same way. And I didn't really know if this is like, important enough or like cool enough to be patented. But working in a company actually helps you a lot in that sense because the lawyers can figure out for you if this is patentable. So the way this works is like once you have an idea or once you have it developed, once it's rolled out, whenever, it is a good time to actually involve the team that is behind like the licensing and patenting within your company itself. So what I did, I'll talk about my experience actually. So what I did was when the feature was developed and we had it rolled out, we did a demo with some of our like stakeholders. Um,
And
and
just
I
just
talked
to
about
just to clarify, this feature is I'm sorry to interrupt you. The feature is the preventing infinity mirroring, right?
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And I kind of explained the same thing, like, Google does this and Zoom does this. So I've done like, what is it called? Comparative analysis
Hmm.
of this feature with other companies as well. And nobody's kind of doing what we are doing right now. So when you kind of feel that nobody else is doing what you're doing, I think that is a really good point where you can make a patent. Um, So, making a patent, I think one question people often have is if you're making a patent, do you want to, or like, do you want to open source it so people can also use it? Or do you want to make it a patent so only you can use it, right? And that's a question we also discussed.
Right,
Yeah,
and if it's not open source so others can use it, and if it's patented just so you can use it, does that mean when other people use it they have to pay you? Like, is that because I think of Apple and multi-touch, right? In 2007 with the iPhone, they said they patented it, but then
Hmm.
there were a bunch of other multi-touch phones. Did they like have to pay? I don't know the details of this, so I really appreciate
Yeah.
you talking about that.
So that's a good question because I don't know the payment details behind it. I just know the licensing details behind it. If you're still open source, like for example, you're making an open source project and you're pretty like motivated to making it open source, you can still patent an open source project, which is something that I didn't know going in. So you can still patent an open source project. I don't know how payment works honestly for an open source patented project, so I can't speak to that. However, I guess the license is different. So when you do use it, you probably have to pay, or however
Right.
you figure it out. I don't know. Okay, so you got an idea which you feel could be patented. I think doing a little bit of comparative analysis is kind of helpful as well, just knowing like what other folks are doing. Because when you want to pitch the idea, you can kind of say it forward and it helps in your pitch. So the next step is usually involving the licensing team, and they do kind of like a demo of your project to understand what it is and if it can be patented. And I think that's a really good step where they can let you know if, especially if you're working for a company like Salesforce, where they can let you know if this can be patented or not. For my case, they saw the demo and they were like, "Yep, we know it can be patented. Let's go forward."
Wow.
Um, yeah, it was pretty clear because like I think they had experienced this too in Zoom and Google Meet. So they were like, "Yep, we can definitely patent it." And then the next step is actually creating a big document, which the company that we were working with actually did the whole work for me. So honestly, for me, it was very easy. But it describes what the product is, what the competition is doing. If this is something that already exists in the market, it usually shouldn't be existing in the market. Only then it can be patented, usually. And what your technical solution is, and what bit of that technical solution do you want to patent? Because you can't patent everything. You can't patent the whole thing, right? You can't patent
Hmm.
internet. So um, what bit of the technical solution do you want do you want to patent is the question. So once you have that technical document prepared, they'll send it over to the US patent board, which then reviews it, and that process can take 2 to 5 years.
What?
So yeah, so there's actually two steps. So once your patent gets approved by the company is when you have a patent pending in your name. And that's where I am right now. I have a patent pending in my name. Now I'm in that 2 to 5 year process where the board is going to review it and come back and be like, okay, here's your patent. Because they give you like a provisional patent. They just say like, okay, this is something we will review. It's not rejected. So yeah. So once that's
But
done, you actually have like
so,
a,
wait. Sorry to interrupt you. You said this is something we will review. It's not rejected. But
yeah.
doesn't review mean it can be rejected?
I think review is kind of like a provisional approval. They'll review it. It's not automatically rejected. What automatic rejection means is that, something else already exists like this and it cannot be
Yeah.
patented, or this is not something that is patentable. So after
But
it is being reviewed, it can still be rejected.
okay, yeah. So you're patent pending now.
Yeah,
And I hope it doesn't happen. I want to be clear, but it could happen that they go like,
it
yeah,
could
actually you
happen.
don't get a patent. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So
So
there's
you get
actually
this
two steps.
provisional. Right. So
Yeah.
you get this provisional patent when it's like it looks like it's like gonna be approved, and so
Yeah.
you get this. Okay, okay, I see.
Yeah.
It's so you get the provisional patent when it's like there's a good chance this will be approved.
Yeah. It's when it's
Mm.
accepted by the board for review, and it's like filed in their system. So they will look at it whenever they have, well, like whenever it's your time, and then they'll let you know if it's like a patent that's been filed. And then you'll get
Awesome.
like a certificate back or whatever, the patent
That's so
back.
cool. That's so
So it's a
cool.
pretty long process. Sometimes it can take like 7 years. I'm hoping it doesn't take that long for me.
Yes, you're back. Sorry, the internet just cut out. And it does that, but it's going to be fine because it doesn't it records your local stuff and then uploads it. It'll be fine. So okay, so you're officially an inventor, patent pending. That's so when your patent is pending, does that then mean if it's a closed patent during the pending time, people can't copy it as well, or
Yeah.
does the like copy prevention only happen like after the 5 years that the patent is filed?
Yeah, so that's why the provisional patent is done. That basically like ensures that people can't copy it by while
Ah,
you have filed it. That's why it's recommended that you file a patent as soon as possible because the moment you file it is when it starts being active.
oh, cool. And yeah, and then that makes sense because as part of the review process, they're like, "Do we have any
Yeah,
other patents?" That okay, okay, that's so cool.
yeah,
So this technology now to prevent infinity mirroring, even if you give away the secrets, well, maybe I should clarify. It's not a. Is it an open source patent or not, or like a patent where you're the only one who can? Slack is the only. Salesforce is the only one who can use it.
yeah. It's not an open source patent, unfortunately. So Salesforce is the only one who can use it. Um, yeah, it's up to the company to make it open source if they want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, it's a competitive edge. Look, I'm well familiar with capitalism. You know,
Yeah.
everybody has to do what they have to do. I'm not here to criticize. Okay, so this means, in theory, you could talk about the technology and how it's built and so on. And there's nothing anyone can do to copy it. It's protected, right? Does that violate any NDA or something, or can we talk about it?
I can't talk about it yet until it is filed.
Rats.
However, um, however, once it is filed, um, I think the specific patent, there's no point talking about it because
Okay.
it wouldn't really make sense. But the specific patent is that you can't copy the solution, which is how we like prevent it. Um, However, you can build your own infinity mirroring solutions
Yeah.
inspired by
Yeah.
that. So
Okay. Cool. I can say I've shared my screen on Slack a lot. I have not encountered infinity mirroring. Your technology is great. I don't know how it's built. I'll probably try and reverse engineer it and find out how it's built. But that's really cool. Okay, let's talk about you. You mentioned you worked on clips and
mhm,
huddles.
yeah,
I'd love to dive a little bit deeper on both of those. I mean, if I was to implement clips, and this is just me being, noob, naive engineer, I
yeah,
obviously don't work on Slack. So I have a chat app. From a user perspective, I'd have this text input field, and if I paste in a video or if I
hmm,
drag a video in, that's sort of the entry point. And at the moment I drop it, what I do is start the upload process, stream it to something like S3 or Cloudflare R2. I believe it's R2, some type of service, and
uh-huh,
then it's globally available on a CDN and downloadable. Since clips are recorded, collections of bytes, there's really no like.
a little bit.
Oh, that's. Am I back?
Yes, the last bit I
Great.
heard was Amazon S3.
Yeah. Okay. So you would upload. Thanks for handling that so gracefully. So you would upload this video to like S3 or something like this. And
Uh-huh.
since it's just a static collection of bytes and it's not streaming like a video call,
Hmm.
it's for me this is like straightforward. You just store it there and then people download it and watch it.
Hmm. Hmm.
What am I missing here? What are my assumptions that maybe shouldn't make in the details of this?
I think you're pretty accurate on that. So you have a file, you upload it. Basically, it sits somewhere in the backend. Your backend could be anything. We use Amazon S3, so everything that we have, video files, audio files, they just sit there. And Amazon handles it pretty well because they give you like a file URL back, and from your video player, all you need to do, like if you know about the video element of HTML, honestly, give it the URL, good to go. And then everything
Yeah.
else is just like front end styling to make it look pretty and, like buffering and everything. But that's basically it. You have a URL, put it somewhere in your backend, you get access to it, use HTML tags,
This
and
is
you're
so
good to go.
good.
You have a video player.
And it has to also be accessible. This makes me super happy. You know why? Because I feel like there's a lot. The whole point of this podcast, I say it. It's part of the intro, right? We try to eliminate imposter syndrome here, and I
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot of people listening going like, "Oh, Slack, it's so sophisticated," and indeed it is. There's a lot of sophisticated pieces, but some things are exactly what you think they are, which I
Yeah.
absolutely love. So I take a lot of comfort in the fact that I was right about how this
Yes.
is built, and the fact that
Awesome.
others listening can do the same. Okay, let's talk about Huddles. Now, Huddles is like Clips, but probably more intense because of the real time streaming.
Yeah.
Um, when I talk to people about features like this, the answer, and I quote, is, "Oh, just use WebRTC." Now,
Huh.
I don't know about browser support yet for WebRTC. To be fair, I'm a little bit outdated here. I don't even know what that means. Just use WebRTC. What does that even mean? So I did build a feature like this, just sort of in a side project. And I'm curious again. So what I'll do is I'll talk about my naive noob implementation, and then we can maybe diff a little bit on how to do it well. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Honestly, like, I don't know how good of a person I'll be to answer those questions because I didn't work on any of that, and it's not something I'm very familiar with.
okay.
So, I can talk about the front end all you want, but the back
Okay.
end bit, I don't know. I didn't really work on it. So,
Sure. Yeah, I think the front end could be because so what I did was in HTML you have media sources. I believe that's what the web API is called. So you create a
huh.
new media source. You
Yeah.
say I want, and then the browser or the device. Slack is an Electron app, as far as I know. It will
Right.
ask you, do you want to give permission for
Yes.
for your camera? And that's using the, I believe it's the web media or the media device or some
Yeah.
API like
Media
this.
source, media device. I think
Yeah,
it's
media
media
source.
source. Yeah.
Wow, okay, I'm warm. This is cool.
Pretty good. Yeah.
And then I get access to the webcam. I get
Yes.
it, and this is a byte stream effectively. And
Yes.
what I would do then is just like take the stream and proxy it to some backend service. And this is where the
Yeah.
boundary for front end ends.
Yeah.
Is that, how close is that? What did I
Correct.
mess up?
Yeah. So you get access to your camera, and that's basically we know we can start recording. And that's the same with screen sharing as well. We get access to
Yes.
your screen, we know we can start recording. Then once you have like this byte, you want to send this byte stream to somewhere, and that's where your backend comes in, S3 buckets, and you store it there. I think if I'm not wrong, and I could be wrong here because not my forte. But Amazon actually gives you like a streaming URL, and that's the URL you can use like within your video element. And again, Huddles again also just video elements. Um, video
This is so
elements with
cool.
like yeah, like video elements with like a bunch of different grids which also have video elements. So we're just like we have URLs for anybody. So for example, if you've been in a huddle, it looks like a grid if you have multiple people. Like for example, what we have right now, these are just video elements with URLs to like different stream buckets. And so once we get permission from you, we start your stream server. Like we start your stream, we send it over to the S3. S3 then gives the client who started the huddle a URL of everybody who's in the call. So then you get like an array of URLs and you create a grid. And then in the grid, it's just video elements. So you like map
This
your
is so
video,
cool.
your URLs, and you have a huddle grid. Um, Now, there's other things like adding background effects, then adding like reaction effects, which is a lot of that gets done by S3 as well. Again, like Amazon has a lot of great services. Uh,
Can I ask a question about this? Because
yeah,
S3, as far as I know, is for
it's the bucket.
but it's I mean S3 is super simple storage, so it's you store stuff there.
Yeah,
But what we're talking about here is real time streaming
yeah,
data streams. Which
yeah.
how does that work with S3?
It's
Because, and I'll tell
powered
you why.
by it's powered by
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
Chime SDK. So you put the stuff in S3, and then you have like Chime SDK, which sends you like a streaming URL, or it like has like background effects and things like that. So
Wow, that's
um,
so cool.
and there was another one which was really cool by S3 like the Chime SDK, I'm forgetting. But yeah, so basically like you have these services that are powered by Amazon and you can use them in your front end. And everything else that kind of looks is basically just like front end styling, like the
Mm.
huddles and the grids, or the background effects. Those are all usually, like front end styling. But in the crux of it, it is just that.
This is so interesting. I love this. So I built a similar thing as I mentioned, and I didn't know that you could do this with the Chime API and S3. So what I used was there's a service called IVS on Amazon on AWS called Interactive Video Service.
Okay.
Um, and that so how it worked for me is I take a video stream, I send it using the AWS SDK to that to IVS, and
Mm,
IVS returns me, and it's an RMTP protocol URL that I pipe to a video element, and boom, I have a stream. Um,
mm.
I had no idea that it translates from like my side project to Slack, just like that. Just like take a front end,
Yeah.
send it to AWS, get a. This is the I want to pause here and just acknowledge the enormous amounts of imposter syndrome. I can hear people like collectively just like exhale a sigh of like, oh wow, that is so cool. Thank you for making this stuff more accessible to the community. I mean, that's why we do this, and I think this is absolutely huge to hear that it's exactly like that at Slack.
Yeah. And
One
like
question, yeah, sorry,
there
go ahead.
are there like I think like we oversimplified the architecture and we talked about,
Yeah,
like everything else is just a sugar. There are other stuff as well
yeah,
and like other layers as well. However, in
can
the crux
imagine.
of it, like you said, it's that, right?
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people, you're so right in that. Like a lot of people feel like imposters, like, oh my God, like this giant app, I don't really know. And especially when we do like these system design questions, it's like so complicated. But at the end of it, it's like the basic elements and like, like sending a URL and then retrieving that URL and putting it in a video element. That's basically it. And honestly, you can, like, people have created like Slack,
clones.
yeah, Slack clones. And um, once you understand kind of how to send a message and retrieve a message, that's basically the whole app.
This is so cool. This is so cool. I would encourage anyone listening, go on GitHub, make a Slack clone. If you're, I will say this: if you get stuck, DM me. I'm on X Tejas Kumar underscore. I will help you. I will come on. I will open a pull request wherever you want. This is so cool because that's why we do this, and I just really want to thank you so much. You mentioned the rest is front end, like decorating the video and so on. I'm
Yeah.
curious about that and how rapidly you can iterate there.
Yeah.
My question here is specifically about a design system, right?
Mm.
Because is it would you then create a custom frame for the video with a custom drop shadow? I assume there's probably some CSS framework at the very least, if not even a more sophisticated design system with atoms and molecules and things like that.
Yeah. So our design system is actually pretty straightforward, I would say. Um, we have our Slack kit, which is our design system, and that
Is it
contains
open
all of.
source?
Yes, I think it's
Nice.
slack-kit.com. Slack-kit.com.
And people can use this when they build the clone as the homework assignment on this episode of Contagious Code podcast. So awesome.
Hold on, let me see if it is available online. Because on my work
It's
computer,
it,
it is slack-kit.com.
yeah, we'll check after the episode. We'll put it in the show notes if it is. If it's not, we're sorry we tried. But maybe you can make. I bet people could make an open source best effort copy of each component they see in Slack, as long as that doesn't violate anything. But anyway,
I think I cut out
okay.
again, right?
No, you're fine. You're totally fine. So okay, so we have Slack Kit that may or may not be open source. So you use this. What's the granularity of this design system?
Yeah, so the granularity is up to the component level. So I think I would compare it with like material design UI. Like
Okay.
with material design, you have an alert box, a drop down. You have all the basic components you need to build your UI app, right? And then everything else you want to build on top of that is up to you. Um, you can style it however you want. However, we have to follow the style guide, and the components typically are like pretty good to go. So you just import it, add whatever props you need to add, and you're pretty much good to go. So your Slack apps are built on top of the Slack kit. Um, However, oftentimes we may not have components that are in Slackit. So, for example, the Huddles grid that you see, we don't have that within Slackit because it's a combination of different Slackit components. So, in that case, we sometimes have to build a whole component from scratch, and it may or may not end up in Slackit. But sometimes components are brand new. But most of the time, if you're adding, for example, like a drop down to Slack, or if you're adding like a new channel or whatever, most of the time it is all part of the design system and it's all done and you just have to import it.
Man, this sounds like if some new feature comes up, like this new design, like the channel navigation piece, it sounds like this is probably why y'all can iterate so fast, right? Because you have all these components in place that help you rapidly iterate there. Did I did I cut out again? Is the
Yes.
internet cutting out?
Yes.
I said that's okay. This happens. It's totally fine. People will understand. What I said was I think it's so cool, and I understand now how you iterate so rapidly because
Right.
all of these pieces are in place. So you just like pick a component here, and if it doesn't exist,
Yeah.
sure you have to make it. But by and large, you just compose things, and you're ready
Yeah.
to go.
And one of the things that I think most companies who use design system is and or follow is that if a component doesn't exist, the first question you should ask is whether this component should be whether we should use something from the design system itself. Because like sometimes the designers may be new and they do not know about the design system that exists in the company, and sometimes we'll receive designs that kind of look like what it should be in the design system, and you may be tempted to build a component from scratch. But the first question you got to ask is, can we use something from the design system so you don't have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, yeah. That's really cool. Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier in the episode that we break things all the time. I love that because I never notice. I do notice sometimes that it's down, which fair, but I don't notice that like this modal used to appear, but now it can't appear because it says can't read the property of undefined. What? That never happens. I have questions about this that you may or may not be able to answer, so feel free to not.
Right.
How do you know about breakages before users?
Yeah. So breakages before users are tested through our pipeline. So we've got the tests that are running, and once you create a pull request, we have tests that run linter rules. Then we run it against like you had a question.
No, no, I don't. But I guess now I do. Are the tests end to end tests?
We've got end-to-end tests, we've got unit tests. So it depends on like what feature you're building. We'll also add test if it's like a big feature that, for example, like Huddles, we need to add a end-to-end feature. Then we'll also have like unit tests that are running. So for example, like we need to receive a message, we need to make sure that the message was received. So we'll test those things as well. So there's a lot of test suites that are built in, and that's how we know if a feature that you built has broken anything. Um, I don't know how we know if a deployment is broken, like if something that we've rolled out has broken. I think it's through user feedback and that gets created into an incident response. Um, but I think
Yeah.
before deployment, we do a lot of like tests to make sure that it doesn't actually break and like anything that you pushed out hasn't broken anything. Pull request also like pull request. What is it called? Code reviews. Pull request
Right.
review. Code reviews actually help a lot as well when you have multiple eyes on the project.
Awesome. That's so great. We have an episode with Artem Zakharchenko from Epic Web, who is like it's his life's mission to make testing just super accessible to everybody.
Mm.
And so we'll maybe publish this one after that because we're talking about testing here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch from. Thank you, by the way. This is such a technical deep dive into Slack. Wow. I think this an insight like this doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet, as far as I know, outside of a few blog articles. So thank you, like straight from like your experienced mouth to all the ears that listen here.
Oh, you're
Um,
most welcome.
I wanted to ask you about maybe the career side of it, right? You're
Yeah.
an extremely high profile professional expert.
I don't know about that.
Well, I think me and all the listeners do, so that's okay. My assumption is Slack found you and asked you to join them. Is that true? Like how did that happen? How did they find you? Did you apply like everybody else? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I actually don't remember. I think a recruiter reached out, and this is when I was like job searching, so I had it on LinkedIn. Like I had the toggle on LinkedIn, and I think a recruiter reached out, and I was super stoked to hear from Slack. I actually did not know a lot of people who worked at Slack before I joined Slack, so but I'd heard of the company, so I was super impressed. Like, not heard of the company, but like I had worked at I had used the product, so I knew about the company, and I actually knew somebody who worked at Slack while I was working at TELUS. They actually left TELUS to join the accessibility team at Slack,
Oh
and
wow.
now I'm at the accessibility team at Slack. So
Are
like,
you sure this wasn't like future you? So like caught in a time loop.
Right? And at the time, I remember they left the company to join the accessibility team. And I was like, wow, there's like a dedicated accessibility team at Slack. Like they must really care about this stuff. Because at TELUS at the time, it was me. It was just one person who was like making sure that the app was accessible. And I was always advocating for people to make it accessible and tell them about like how this is impacting these folks. And when I heard that this person was actually joining the accessibility team, I was like, okay, somebody really cares about this stuff. Like I already
Yeah.
had like a good impression of them. And then so when the recruiter reached out, I was immediately super excited about it, and I started the interview process. Actually, one of the best things that I liked about Slack, even before joining, was their interview process, which really convinced me to join. So you mentioned you worked at Spotify. I had an offer
Yes.
from Spotify as well, and I had to choose between Spotify and Slack. And the reason I chose Slack was because of their interview process, which is crazy. So interview process can make a lot of impact on employee on like future employees. So
Yeah.
companies must always focus on their interview process as well.
Yes.
Um, Actually, speaking of which, I should talk about that. So
Sure.
one of the things that I really liked about like Slack's interview process was they made me feel like a human, and they made me feel
Mm.
like, my time and energy was important to them. One of the things they did was gave me like 15-minute break after every session. And before the next interview round, like before the next interview round, every interviewer would ask me if I needed a break or if I need to get a snack or if I need to get water. And I
Wait,
was like,
was this in person or virtual?
virtual.
Okay. And you had many rounds in the same day?
I had 4 rounds in the same day. Um, yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
4 rounds in the same day. And yeah, all back to back, but all like 45 minutes. And so there was always a 15-minute break. And so I was just like, okay, like they really care about my experience. And everybody would ask me if I needed like a restroom break or snack or water before we get started. And I was like, people really care about, how they make other people feel. So that was really nice. Another thing that I really liked about Slack's interview process was they didn't have like a what is that called, live code round.
Oh
So
yeah.
they give you a at home assignment, and the at home assignment is not to build a feature, but it is to review somebody's code. And
Oh,
what they're
awesome.
testing you is how you can spot bugs, like the technical aspects, but also the empathy aspect. So they're checking like how you give feedback and how nice you are, or how you kind of tell them like something is wrong with their code, because something would be wrong with their code. So the whole point of the exercise was to see how empathetic you are, and how you help everybody kind of learn and grow together instead of kind of like attacking people, which happens a lot during code reviews. So which I loved, because I was like, this is so practical. Like this is something I'd be doing at work instead of just
Yeah.
doing like a stupid data structure question.
Yeah. Yeah. If you mentioned you chose Slack over Spotify when you were interviewing at both at the same time, we may have had the same interview experience at Spotify. Um, I can say this: it was not the same as what you just mentioned. We had and for those interested, I'll just say it. We had we had multiple live coding interviews,
Yeah.
using, I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe Coder, whatever it was, didn't have TypeScript support, and
Oh.
or maybe it did, but we just didn't use it in the interview. And to be fair, I will say this: I don't know. You can tell me if you had the same technical interview. Um, but for me, it was for a front end position, or actually,
Mhm.
they don't do front end. They just do like senior software engineer.
Hmm.
But there was a front end portion of the interview where it was actually really, really great.
Hmm.
They said, let's start by making a traffic light with HTML and CSS. And so just a traffic light. So you do a div and you do 3 divs inside, and the inside divs have, border radius 100%, background red, background yellow, background green. Cool. Okay, done. Now next, let's make one of the lights of the traffic light on and the others off. So we just lower the opacity for the other. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Nice, nice, great. Okay, now let's make the light change according to a preset timer, just like a real traffic light. And so
Uh-huh.
we add some JavaScript, and okay, cool, 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 cool. This is so cool. Okay, now let's add another traffic light and have them coordinated. Okay, cool, cool, cool. And so basically, in the end, what they had us do is, or what they had me do is, you just componentize the traffic light and you have 100 traffic lights on the page, and it's
Oh,
performant. Yeah,
huh,
it was actually a lot of fun.
huh.
Um, and that was just one of the technical interviews, that was the one I enjoyed the most. There were others that I did not enjoy, which was, and I have no, I'd say, shame in saying this. It like some of them were iterate through this list, this CSV basically of songs, and find the three most commonly played song, like the most commonly played triplet of songs. So the
Mm.
most commonly played three sequence of songs. And I started writing this thing with just built-in JavaScript array dot reduce,
Yeah.
and the requirement, and this is what I hate in every single technical interview,
Uh-huh.
is, oh no, instead of using array dot reduce, just do a for loop. and and for me, I'm like,
I can
why?
use whatever I want.
Yeah, I mean, JavaScript gives you these declarative functions because if you use the declarative function, the runtime will optimize it for you.
Right.
In theory, that's why the language gives you that, because it's like, look, trust us. We build the engine around this. It's probably going to do better. And so I don't get that, and that's what I didn't enjoy. Not
That's
to make
weird
all of,
though. No, but
yeah,
that
not
I
to,
think you're right. That's weird. Like they ask you to use for instead of reduce, because even if somebody was checking on your like technical JavaScript skills, if they said use reduce instead of for, I could still be like, okay, they're checking if like array
yeah.
methods. But so weird that they asked you to use for instead of reduce.
Yeah, and it's in some cases that makes sense. For example, if you're doing like IoT or embedded stuff and you're
Mm.
extremely constrained on
Mhm.
memory, it is true that the declarative abstraction will be more expensive because you need to like load a function into memory as opposed to just directly like access a variable and mutate it. And you need to then copy everything. That's the problem with functional
Mm.
programming, right? You need to copy everything twice. So
Right.
I get it, but in this case, it's a massive Electron app that's the player. So like it's already memory hungry. I guess maybe that's why they want to be sensitive. In any case, this is not to criticize that. It's just I didn't enjoy that.
Hmm.
But I hear your experience here at Slack, and I'm like, wow, I see now why you chose that. Can you speak to actually maybe pulling on that thread a little bit? You talked about how they interviewed how you review code.
Hmm.
Um, how should, for people listening, how should we, and I don't like the word should because it maybe makes a lot of assumptions, but what's the ideal, what's the gold standard? Say you open up, or I open a pull request.
Yeah.
um how would you approach that? Let's assume the pull request absolutely sucks.
Hmm.
It's I'm not being dry, there's a lot of duplication, I haven't run prettier, there's like semicolons in places they shouldn't be.
Hmm.
um Put it this way, it looks as if I didn't review the code myself and I don't care. I didn't even test it locally, right? So
Hmm.
how would you approach that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like safeguards we can build that can prevent, like dirty code going out. First of all, so people who are reviewing don't even have to bother talking about it. For example, linter rules. Like if you don't have semicolons, linter can catch that. If you have console logs everywhere in your code, linter can catch that. So a lot of the work I feel like that we as code reviewers tend to do, like instead of using small case here, please use capital case. Those small things linter can do for you. So automate whatever you can. I think once your code review is like once your pull request is created, as a reviewer you should be looking, again, shouldn't say should, but um what you want to be looking for is what is the logic behind this. So can you explain this code to yourself, or if
Yeah.
you wrote this code, would you be able to explain it to somebody else? And the reason why we do this is because that is kind of like a test to see if the code is intuitive enough, right? Because you can write beautiful code, but if people can't understand it, it's useless. At the end of the day, we're all just writing code so that other humans can understand, because computers can easily understand our code. So, the first question I think when I review a pull request is I ask if I can explain it to me, and if I was to write this code, if I could explain it to somebody else. If it doesn't make sense for me, one of the questions, like I'll actually ask questions. And code review is actually a really good it's a really good chance for both reviewer and author to learn. So one thing that
Beautiful.
we emphasize a lot on is, you are, as a reviewer, it's not just you who's reviewing the code, but also it's an opportunity for you to learn from the author as well, right? So you're learning about a new feature. So if you don't understand anything in the code, first ask the author, because they probably know more about the code than you do. So ask the author about, like, why did you make this technical decision? And if you have a better suggestion, you could also say, like, in my mind, or like I would do this way. I'm curious to learn why you made this way, right? So I
Yeah.
think approaching it from a learning perspective already puts you in an empathetic spot and
Beautiful.
already brings you from like a, like let's do this together kind of mode instead of like me versus you. Because at the end of the day, we're all just one team and we're all trying to make Slack better or like whichever company better, right? So approaching it from like a learning perspective already puts you in a good spot. And let's say that the code has issues, or let's say that it's like really code that you don't understand, or like doesn't make sense, or there's a lot of bugs. I think for those, it is okay to point it out, of course, because it's a learning experience for the author as well. But then again, put empathy in the first seat. So you should always approach it from like a kind attitude and
Yeah.
share, like, because they're also learning, right? It may be their first pull request of their career or first pull request at your company, right? So approach it from a way like you would approach with a friend and share, like, hey, I think this could be this way, or I think this could introduce a bug. So what do you think about this? Right? So always kind of using it as a way to teach or like to learn and to teach folks, I think helps a lot instead of like trying to attack somebody with the pull request. And that's been my approach. One thing that we also like to do is also test the code. Um, so usually we include like a testing URL with every pull request. And that's really helpful in reviewing, but also like testing the code as well. I talked about, like how code reviews are also a good point to test.
Hmm.
So if somebody may have missed something, you may be able to catch it. Again, the onus is not on the reviewer to test, it's still on the author, but also just, more eyes on the code is better for testing as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I like that you talk about being curious as the first step towards empathy. Um, and like an old colleague of mine used to say, like literally every day he came to work, he'd do something, and then he'd be like, this was his mantra, this was his catchphrase. He would say, every day is a school day, because
Hmm.
he's always like positioned to learn. And
Right.
I so appreciate you for calling attention to that. I want to ask you maybe a bit of a left field question here, which is, you've worked at this big telex, what was that
Tell
called? The
us.
the Telus, right?
Yeah.
You've worked at Telus, you've worked at PayPal, you've worked at
Mhm.
Slack. This is all big tech. Um, there's people listening going, okay, should I join a startup or should I go big tech? Now,
Hmm.
you've had dominantly experience with big tech. I'm curious if you could maybe say a few words about people at this crossroads. What are some of
Hmm.
the good things about big tech? What are some of the trade-offs?
Yeah.
From my experience at Spotify, we moved very, very slowly compared to startups
Hmm.
because we had to be more careful. We have like
Right.
millions of people listening to our music, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could speak to the dynamic there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. Like I worked at these big companies, but also in between I worked at smaller companies. I was at Pick System for almost a year, which is like 100 people company at the time, and I think it's even smaller now. I also worked at like a 6 people startup company right before starting Tellus. So I've kind of like seen, and I had my own startup as well. So I've kind of seen like the really small startups where you're like working in like a co-working space, and like these giant companies who have massive offices, some office, multiple offices. um, I think one of the biggest things for me was the difference in structure. Like for example, in the small startups, like a 5 people startup, your role isn't very defined. You'll be joining as a software engineer, and that could mean anything. That could
Yeah.
mean creating presentations to pitch your product to the next investor. That could mean doing backend stuff. That could mean deploying servers. That could mean doing just like adding buttons to the UI. So that could be anything, right? In a small startup like that. So your role is you get to learn a lot. And one of the things is that if you're stuck, you don't really know where to get help because everybody else is doing something else that you may not be doing, right? So nobody else kind of has the same either technical expertise as you or the same background context as you. So sometimes it's hard to get help when you're stuck, especially if you're new in your career. And for that reason, I joined Telus, which was a much more like much bigger company and a lot of people to look up to. So that also means a lot of mentorship opportunities, right? So I joined Slack as I joined Huddles as an automation engineer because I had no idea what it was. I just got the job and I was like, might as well take it. It pays well. And
Nice.
when I joined, I was like, okay, I'm not building features, I'm testing features, but I want to be building features, right? So I had a lot of opportunities there to learn from other engineers who were actually doing development, to learn like React and Redux and Angular. And I had like a 1 hour tutorial session with folks who would help me kind of understand Angular because it was so complicated. And I cannot imagine having that kind of experience in a startup because,
Yeah.
nobody else would probably know. Or even if they did, they were either like different, they're probably super busy or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have that kind of like resources in a really big company where you can ask folks for help. When I moved to PayPal, it was even more structured because a much bigger company, and a lot more opportunities as well. One of the things that I did like at a big company is that, let's say you're working in a team and your team sucks for whatever reason, like you don't like your manager or like your teammates are horrible or you don't like the product or whatever it may be. There's a lot of opportunities to move around, right? And learn different parts of the stack as well. So at PayPal, I joined with with the team. I worked there for 2 years. Then I moved to a different part of the team. It was like working in a different company because they weren't even using JavaScript. They were using Java.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was just like, oh my God, what am I doing? Because I wanted to learn payments. And I was like, okay, I'll move to this team. And I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm a front end engineer. I do not belong here. And then I moved on to a different team, which was the checkout team, which was like the best experience I had. So there's a lot of opportunities to move around in a big company, which is a great thing. However, because there's a lot of structure, you can also get stuck. So, like if you want to move around, it may not be that easy depending on your own company, or there may not be opportunities for you, or like the role has an open or whatever it may be. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of process in that. So I think there's plus and minus to both. I honestly feel like if you want to join a startup, it's a really great place to learn a lot. Um, and you get a lot of autonomy over work. So you have a lot of like say in what you're building, but also a lot of great learning experience. And if you want to join a big company, there's a lot of help available and there's a lot of things to learn as well. So I think there's plus to both and negatives to both. I would say the best experience would be to like try out both the things and
Yeah.
see what you like and where you fit best.
That's so good. Yeah, I can say that. Amen. Everything to what you said. I went the other way. Spotify, I think, was the only big tech company I ever worked at.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you consider Vercel big tech. They are maybe now, but like back in
Hmm.
2018, they were, there was Zeit. There was a whole different thing. There was like 12 people. But like, yeah, I spent most of my career in startups. And exactly what you said, you get a lot of autonomy and you learn rapidly. Like for me, oh my gosh, like I learned so much. And part of the reason I learned was I lied. I lied pathologically. And I'll confess it now. Early in my career, I had managers going like, hey, we need to build this like real time multiplayer collaborative whiteboard like TL Draw. I mean, it didn't exist back then, but we need to build this thing. You can do that, right? And I was like, oh yeah, totally. I'll just JavaScript and event listener. Yeah, yeah, totally. I had no idea what I was doing. But then there were expectations on me, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my job. And I started freaking out. And then in my panic, I actually learned and built it. Did it scale? No. After 50 users, it totally crashed. But I built it. And it worked locally and it worked for the first 50 users, right? So I did learn a lot. And after it failed, believe me, I learned more. So startups definitely help there. I've never actually been good at like in a big company asking for help. And I
Hmm.
think it's just me. There's something in my personality that I have some deeply internalized like false belief that nobody's going to help me and I need to figure everything out myself.
Hmm.
And that's really unfortunate. I think that's really why I couldn't thrive fully at Spotify. And I'll admit that's entirely my thing.
Hmm.
You talk about changing teams inside a company. I know that in a big company, various teams are like little startup units themselves.
Yeah.
Um, how do you do that? Like, so when I left Spotify, a lot of people were telling me, and I didn't know because this was my first big company. They were telling me like, "Why are you leaving? Just change teams. Go be in
Hmm.
a different team." And I didn't know this was the thing people do.
Hmm.
And I found out after I quit. So, um, but how do you do that? Like, does the team lead not take it personally? Like, isn't it like a breakup? Like, how do you navigate that?
I thought that too, like the first time I was changing teams. However, I think like okay, so let's talk about like how to change teams in a big company. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot, like during conferences and stuff, is networking,
Mm,
and we talk about like external networking, like networking with people outside of your company. However, it's equally important to network with people within your company, both for like asking for help, because if you know people, you can ask for help more comfortably, right? Because now they're your friend, but also when there's like opportunities arise, you know about it. You hear through other people who probably know about it. So I think and second is careers page within the company itself, because teams post job inside the companies as well. So those are the two places to know. Like you probably hear from people you already know, or there's a team you like. And like for example, I wanted to learn about payments while I was working at PayPal, and I just like browsed which teams are looking in the careers page as well, and found a team and went down that route. I talked to the manager. Luckily, the manager I knew because I had spoken with her before and I knew she was awesome. So I was interested in that team. Um, if you don't know them personally, you can also like reach out to them, send a DM, and be like to the manager actually, and be like, hey, I'm interested in this team. Are you looking? If you are, then I would be interested, so on and so forth. It's also a good idea to kind of, before going to the new team, figuring out how that team is. And so what I like to do is if I know somebody in that team, I'll talk to them about like the culture of the team. And, one thing that is really important to me is work-life balance, because I don't want
yeah.
to burn myself out working for a company. So I talk about that as well, and what skill, like what technologies they're using and how really close to the technologies they are. So I talk about that with an engineer, and they can really give you like the real thing, like the real story behind the scene. If you don't know anybody, it's also okay to just like reach out coldly and just say like, hey, I'm interested in this team. I was wondering if I can learn a little bit more from you and have like 15 minutes of your time, whatever. So, like looking for opportunities, I think is important, because I feel like oftentimes we feel that, if you're stuck in a big company, like you said, right? Like it feels like the end of it, but there's so many different teams, and every team kind of feels like a new company in itself, especially if they're kind of like far removed from each other. I
Yeah.
changed teams within Slack as well, and I had the same experience. The previous team I worked at had a completely different work life balance and a different work culture, but this team has a completely different work life balance. And I think like if you are having a hard time in a big company, I would highly encourage you moving to a different team instead of changing the companies completely, because it's much easier to move to a different team than starting the whole interview process, and it's very stressful just starting the whole interview process again.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they make you do like some live coding thing and without TypeScript support. No, but cool. I hear that, but my question still stands, right? Like, how do
Uh-huh.
you start that conversation? Do you meet with your manager and go like, "Listen, I." So
Oh,
you mentioned yes, build your network internally, like you
right.
would at a conference, but then like, do you go to your manager and
Yeah.
go, "It's not working for me. I'm sorry. It's not you. It's me." Is it the similar like breakup style speech? And then how do they
Yeah.
react to that? Did they get hurt? I mean, it's professional, so I guess not, but I've never actually done that, so I'm curious
Yeah,
about it.
good question. Actually, I forgot to answer that. Yeah, so I for the three times that I've changed teams, I've had like a definitive answer from the new team before moving on and talking to my current manager, because I wanted to make sure that I actually had like a position there before I say goodbyes. Just like finding a new job, right? Accepting
Yeah.
an offer. And so what I did was, after I knew for sure that I could be moved to the new team, I set up a meeting with my manager and I said like, hey, I think I want to grow in a different direction, and I found a different team, and I want to move there, and I would love for you to support me in this move. Most of the times, if the manager is nice and believes in your career and wants to help you grow, they would be supportive of this move. Sometimes they may ask you like, what's wrong, or like, why are you moving? And if you feel comfortable, you can share the reason and you can say like the truth, or you can say something, like professional and,
Yeah.
diplomatic, like, oh, whatever, I want to learn and whatever. I want to grow in my career, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think for me, like when I moved from the first team I worked at PayPal to the payments team, I was very honest about my experience. So I said like I worked in this team for 2 years and I think I know the stack well and I know this side of the product well. Now I want to work on payments, which is something that I feel is integral to PayPal, and I don't know anything about it, so I would like to move there. And so they were pretty supportive of it because they understood. I've been in their team for 2 years, so they understood that. They were pretty supportive. When I moved from my payments team, which is where I wanted to be, within 3 months to a different team, it was a completely different reason
Yeah.
because
It's the
I,
Java thing, right? You didn't know you were so
yeah,
out of your depth. Yeah.
and the role wasn't fit for me. So, and that happens sometimes, right? You might move to a new team, same with the new job, and the role may not be for you. So you assess what's best for you and make the career move for you. And if people's feelings get hurt, like try your best to be professional and diplomatic and empathetic. But if
Yeah.
people's feelings get hurt because you're moving to a new team, can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, you just give your best and what happens happens. I love that. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I want to start wrapping up, but I do want to ask you like a question that I think is on the minds of many people like us. And what I mean by that is what has been the role of diversity and inclusion in your job? And I realize this is a super pointed question because you're brown like me, and
And a
and
woman.
and a woman exactly. But I do want to ask it, and I'll tell you why. Like my career, I think it's no secret. My first job in Germany, racist AF, right? Like I was
Oh,
literally, my nickname was, I can't even say the word, but it's the S word. My nickname was S word boy, and it was like they would literally call me that because, and I asked why, and it's like because your skin color is the same color as
oh my God.
oh, there was a lot. There was hiring you was a mistake. There was like, it was, we should not have brought you here. It was, we wish you never came here. It was just like constant torment, right?
Horrible.
Um, yeah, and thankfully I'm the kind of person who can receive that. I did go home crying like almost every week, and but that was a catalyst. Like I was able to channel that into like, oh, I'm going to study this JavaScript so intensely, and one day I'll have a podcast. You'll all see, and maybe not quite the podcast so specifically, but it worked to motivate
Right.
me.
Yeah.
But no, I understand not everybody responds that way, and some people go like, "Oh my gosh, do I even matter?" And it can lead to some real issues. So, with
Yeah.
all of that context, I'm curious if I hope you didn't go through the same thing, but what has your experience been like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Tejas, that was a horrible experience, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That is a very shitty experience. Um, and I hope nobody who's listening has to go through that as well themselves. Um, I think for me, like, luckily, I'd been fortunate in my professional career that I haven't had experiences like that. However, I do
Uh oh.
remember one experience very clearly, which is, and this is not at PayPal, however, this was when I joined PayPal. Um, I think most people may have heard of Free Code Camp, which is,
Oh yeah.
if you have not, it's a amazing resource for learning coding, front end, back end. So Free Code Camp runs a YouTube channel, and on the YouTube channel they have a playlist of kind of showing the life of a developer at different companies. So when I joined PayPal, they reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in doing a life of a developer at PayPal video. And it was probably my first month at PayPal, or very, very new to PayPal. So I was super excited about it. And I definitely said yes. And so I shot the video, and it was a video of me walking through the campus and showing people like what the campus is like, and talking through our stand up. And, like then I had a shot of me working. I couldn't really show my code, so I can't really, like show you what
Yeah.
actually do at work. I can just show you what it looks like to do at work. And so it was like a very cool, I thought it was a really cool video of, like life of a PayPal developer. And I wanted to show the campus and, like the cool things of being at PayPal as well. And this was still pre-pandemic days, so I could actually show the campus.
Yeah.
But once the video was published, I had these like horrible comments from people on the YouTube video. They were like, "Oh, look at that! People hired this diversity hire because
Ooh.
she's not really doing any code. Look at that. If PayPal goes down, we know who is responsible. And
Ooh.
these comments were so horrible. And this was the first time I appeared on like any, and this was before I gave a conference talk as well. So this was
Oh
the
my
first
gosh.
like public facing event I had. And I was like, holy shit, am I actually not supposed to be here? Did
Yeah.
PayPal actually hire me because I'm a woman? And these
Oh,
comments just made me feel so horrible. And I was like, I am never putting up a YouTube video. I'm just gonna go in my cocoon and lie down there. And um, but there were, you know what? There were really great comments in the video as well. But I could
yeah.
not focus on those because all
Of
I could
course.
see was the negative comments. And a few months later, I had a call with Bo, uh, who's the creator behind the YouTube channel of Free Code Camp, and he said, "You know, your video did really well." And I was like, "What?" There were
Did we did
horrible
did we
comments.
watch different videos? Yeah.
I was like, there were horrible comments on it. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to disable the comments. There's always shitty comments on it. And no matter who posts it, there's always shitty comments. People are always going to say shit. But there was a lot of good comments as well. So sorry about the bad comments. People sometimes are crazy on the internet. But, the video did really well. A lot of people watched it. So I think it was a success. And I was like, what? Okay, completely different perspective, but thank you so much for saying that because that makes me feel a lot better. But yeah, like I think as a woman, honestly, like even when I go to conferences right now, as a woman engineer, um, as a minority, I feel like an imposter, like standing up on the stage and talking about React and stuff. I'm not even on the React core team, I feel like. So I don't know, there's a lot of like imposter syndrome for sure, but also I think being as a woman and standing in front of like 500 men, not 500 all men, but a majorly men crowd, it feels very weird. I hope more women come up on the stage and talk about it, like talk about technical stuff so that there's
Yeah.
like more of us out there and there's more women in the audience as well. However,
Yeah.
as of now, there's a lot of men in the audience and it kind of feels very daunting at times.
I can imagine. And it also probably feels creepy because like well,
Yeah.
men can be men. Unfortunately, whatever. Anyway, I think thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I think it's important. I think what you say is also really important, right? About the having more women attendees and speakers.
Yeah.
I've been at conferences where I've heard people. Gosh, I absolutely despise the world and the industry sometimes because I've heard things like, and this is not about you. This is about whenever there's a female speaker at a conference. I've heard men go, it's a female speaker. It's going to be about soft skills. I bet you it's going to be about soft skills. I bet
Uh,
you it's going to be about something non-technical. And I was like, why? Why do you have to be like that?
yeah.
Like this doesn't. In fact, you know what? You could use the soft skills. You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um,
You
yeah.
need
It
them.
just you need them absolutely, and it kind of bothers me that I don't even know if this is true, but the reputation is the majority of women talk about this stuff. I feel like men should talk about this stuff because men, at least
Yeah.
from what I've seen in tech, need it
Yeah.
a lot more. So anyway, all that to say, I hope the record gets set straight. I also, for the record, for conference organizers, I think it's important to have when you have like women in your lineup or panels. I've seen so many like let's celebrate diversity, and they have this
Hmm.
like panel of women, but the
Hmm.
topic of the panel is what's it like to be a woman in tech, and
Hmm.
that sort of like defeats the purpose. Like I would love to see a panel of women talking about really awesome tech stuff, like
Yeah, like
women,
being
a
an
panel of
engineer.
yeah, exactly. A panel of women doing exactly what a panel would do, regardless of gender or
Right.
sex. You know, and I that
Yeah.
that is true equality. It's not like okay, let's get
Yeah.
women up here to talk about how it's like to be a woman, because that's not the same as
Yeah.
anyway. I'm so thankful that you agree. I'm so thankful we drew that distinction, and I do hope that the industry gets better. And frankly, since my that racist experience in 2015, 2016, the industry
Hmm.
has come a long way. I will say that.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's come a long way or if people just like me now because I'm somewhat prominent. I hope it's the first one. Um, in
I
any
think it's
case,
both.
yeah, unfortunately, I do want to thank you though for being so open about that. And I think honestly,
Yeah.
the more open we are about these things, the better the industry will be, right?
Yeah. I think speaking of which, like, you talked about like conference organizers and like putting a diversity panel. I think one thing that I also notice sometimes when I get a conference invitation is when you're asking a woman to be in the conference list of speakers just because she's a woman. And we can kind of tell that, right?
Oh
Because
yeah.
when you look at the list of speakers, everybody's a man except for one person. So you're just trying to put a woman because, like we need to have more women speakers or we need to have a woman
Yeah.
speaker. And we can tell that, right? And that looks really, really bad. And I've seen conferences who've invited me like that, and I've rejected that, saying, like, there isn't enough diversity in your set of speakers, so I won't be able to join.
Good. Yeah. I wonder though if that's not a step forward. You know what I mean? Like, because at least they're trying. What's the alternative? They just don't even like have
That's
women.
true. I think, however, like when you announce the first set of speakers, you've already like sent out your first invitations, right? And then whatever's happening afterwards is like a second thought. Because, like the first
Yeah.
set of speakers is also like you have deliberately made that choice to invite these folks. And at that point, you decided to not invite any women. And now you're like, okay, we need some women because everybody looks like a man on the speakers list, right?
Yeah.
So I think like when the speakers list looks like all women, like all men, they've already made that decision to only put men there. And now they're just like
Making
it's like
up
a
for a mistake, like an afterthought.
exactly. And that feels bad. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's like you want me not because I'm worth listening to, but
Yeah.
because I'm diverse. Yeah,
Right.
totally. Totally. And that's somewhat dehumanizing or like de-skillifying, if that's a
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, Shruti. I just want to let's leave it there. Thank you. You've given so much. You've given first of all your time. You've given your energy. You've given your effort. You've given your bandwidth. And we covered so much. I mean, we covered your career, and we dove so deep. I think this is probably the deepest dive into engineering at Slack that exists on the internet at this point in time. And then from there, we moved to career choices and startup or big company, and now with diversity, inclusion, and equity. I just want to like thank you so much for setting aside this time to come have this, what I believe is a really important discussion on the Contagious Code podcast. Not really, on behalf of me and all of the listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, this was so wonderful. Thanks for having me, Tejas. And I totally enjoyed talking about Slack. And I think one thing that you highlighted, which I want to reiterate, is, like you said, like Slack feels like so complicated. And it's true for like any software, right? But at the end of it, it's like basic HTML, like, video elements, whatever. It's video elements for Slack, but similar elements for other companies. And as folks who are looking at this, like these big softwares, we tend to feel like an imposter, like you said, right? And like feel that, we don't know how to build these complicated apps. But at the end of it, it's all just like simple fundamental stuff that you've learned. And every company's kind of built on top of it by adding like sugars, like syntactic sugars and like CSS and whatever, and like more layers and whatever. But at the end of it, you know the fundamentals, you will be good. So don't worry too much about these complicated apps. You can build one too by just adding more layers.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Tejas.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Shruti Kapoor. I hope you got out of it as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed learning about how Slack is built, how video features work and are added to Slack, their awesome testing process. I hope you enjoyed the pieces about patents and, most importantly, the pieces about diversity, inclusion, and perspectives. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, I'd invite you to, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. It's a great way to support us that doesn't actually cost you anything, and like the video. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, then please consider leaving us up to a 5-star review and also sharing this with your friends wherever they may be. And all of this really is just signal to help me understand if this work is valuable, and if it is, then I can keep doing it, and if it's not, I can go spend my efforts somewhere else. This podcast, or me, I guess, is Tejas Kumar _ on X. I invite you to give me a follow and come continue the discussion there. This is very much a dialogue. It's not a monologue, definitely not. It's maybe even a trialogue, right? Me, a guest, and you. And we're happy to continue doing that. Next up on the podcast, we're continuing with our founder and CEO season. We're going to hear from some great people, and I invite you, if you're not yet subscribed, now is a great time to do that. Thank you for being a part of the discussion. Thank you for your input, and most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.